If you're watching this, it's because you've recently acquired a time machine and are thinking about visiting the Mongol Empire during the height of the conquests. It's a bold choice, possibly one of the most dangerous periods you could pick, but it will present you with some unique opportunities to witness one of the most transformative periods in human history. So I'm going to give you some advice here on what to look out for and some things to think about before you go. This can't be comprehensive. You'll have to do a lot of your own research, especially about the particular time and place that you're going to go to, but consider this a jumping-off point for your journey. First of all, let me get a couple of caveats out of the way. The Mongol conquests span a pretty long time. We're talking roughly 1206 when Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes, through about 1260 or even later depending on which part of the empire you're looking at. For this video I'm going to focus mainly on the period from about 1220 through 1260, which covers the major Western campaigns and the establishment of the different khanates. And I'm going to assume you're visiting during an active campaign period, not just hanging out in Karakoram, the capital. If you just want to visit the Mongol homeland during peacetime, that's a different situation, but I'm assuming you want to see the conquests themselves, so that's what we're going to talk about. Also, I need to be clear about something. This is going to be dangerous. Like, really dangerous. More dangerous than most other time periods you could visit. The Mongol conquests were incredibly violent. Cities were destroyed, populations were massacred, and the body count was astronomical. So if you're risk-averse, maybe pick a different destination. I'm serious about that. But if you're committed to going, let's talk about how to do it as safely as possible. Okay, so first of all, health. This is going to be a massive concern. You will need to get vaccinated for everything you possibly can, and even then it's not going to be enough. The Mongol armies moved across vast distances, through different climate zones, and they encountered diseases from all over Eurasia. Bubonic plague was present in some areas. In fact, some historians think the Mongols may have helped spread it westward, though that's debated. You'll also need to worry about typhus, dysentery, and various other diseases that thrive in military camp conditions. And speaking of camp conditions, sanitation is going to be terrible when you're around large groups of people. Gastrointestinal infections are basically guaranteed. Your modern gut is not prepared for the medieval microbiome, and certainly not prepared for the conditions you'll encounter in a military campaign setting. Bring antidiarrheal medication. Lots of it. You're going to need it. Also, depending on where you're going, you might need malaria medication. If the Mongols are campaigning in the Middle East or parts of China, malaria could be an issue. And obviously, I'm not a doctor. You need to consult with a healthcare professional before you go, and good luck explaining to them where you're actually going. Maybe just say you're doing extreme historical reenactment in Central Asia or something. Now let's talk about personal safety, because this is the big one. The Mongol conquests were extraordinarily violent, and you need to understand what you're walking into. When the Mongols besieged a city, they would often offer terms: surrender immediately and you'll be relatively okay, you'll pay tribute, you'll provide soldiers and craftsmen, but you'll live. Resist, and things go very differently. Cities that resisted faced complete destruction. We're talking total annihilation in some cases. The populations would be massacred, buildings burned, irrigation systems destroyed. The Mongols did this deliberately as a terror tactic. They wanted word to spread, don't resist us, or this is what happens to you. So here's my advice: do not be in a city when the Mongols arrive unless that city has already agreed to surrender. If you're visiting a city and you hear the Mongols are coming, leave immediately. Don't wait around to see what happens. Just go. And if you hear that a city has decided to resist, get out even faster. I cannot stress this enough. When the Mongols sacked Baghdad in 1258, estimates of the death toll range from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million people. The city burned for weeks. That's not something you want to witness firsthand, and you definitely don't want to be caught up in it. Now, if you want to observe the Mongol army itself, that's a different story, and actually somewhat safer in a weird way. The Mongols were incredibly organized. They weren't just a horde of barbarians, that's a misconception. They had sophisticated military organization, supply chains, intelligence networks, the whole thing. If you can attach yourself to the Mongol army, you'd actually be relatively protected, at least from external threats. But getting into that position is tricky, which I'll talk about in a bit when we get to backstory. Travel in a group. Do not go alone. This is crucial. The Mongol conquests created chaos across Eurasia. Refugees fleeing the armies, bandits taking advantage of the breakdown of order, displaced populations moving around. It was dangerous everywhere. A lone traveler is a target. You need a group for protection. And everyone in your group should be armed. Carry a weapon, preferably something you know how to use. A bow would be ideal if you can use one, but at minimum carry a knife or dagger. Learn how to use it before you go. Keep your valuables on your person at all times. Actually, scratch that, don't bring valuables. Bring the minimum amount of stuff you need to survive. Anything you have can be stolen, and unlike more settled societies where there was at least a theoretical legal system you could appeal to, during the Mongol conquests there often wasn't any authority to appeal to. Law and order had broken down in many areas. So just don't bring anything you can't afford to lose. Now, let's talk about money, because this is actually really interesting. The Mongol Empire used a lot of different currencies depending on where you were. In China, they eventually established paper money, which was actually pretty sophisticated. But during the conquest period, you're mainly looking at silver as the universal medium of exchange. Silver was recognized everywhere. Chinese silver ingots, Islamic silver coins, European silver, it all worked. The Mongols themselves used a weight-based system rather than coinage for a lot of transactions. So if you're bringing money, bring silver. Small pieces of silver that can be cut or weighed. Don't bring large amounts, remember, you can be robbed, but bring enough to purchase food and supplies. You could also bring trade goods. Textiles, furs, spices, portable, valuable items that you could trade. The Mongol conquests actually increased trade across Eurasia because once the Mongols consolidated control, they protected trade routes. But during the active conquest period, trading is going to be risky. Still, it's an option. Where should you sleep? This depends on where you are. If you're in a city that's not currently under siege, you have options: inns, caravanserais, especially in Central Asia and the Middle East, monasteries or religious institutions, or private homes. The Mongols actually established a pretty sophisticated postal relay system called the Yam, with stations along major routes where official travelers could get fresh horses and food and lodging. But you can't use that unless you're traveling on official Mongol business, and you'd need a paisa, a passport tablet, to prove you had authorization. So that's probably not an option for you. If you're traveling with or near the Mongol army, you're camping. The Mongols were nomadic people, and their armies were essentially mobile cities. They lived in felt tents, sometimes called yurts. You'd need to get one of those if you're going to be traveling with them for any length of time. They're actually pretty comfortable, all things considered. Warm in the winter, relatively cool in the summer, portable. But you'd need to know how to set one up and take it down, and you'd need animals to transport it, horses or camels or oxen. Food is going to be interesting. Mongol diet was heavy on meat and dairy. Mutton, horse meat, mare's milk, fermented mare's milk called irag or kumis. If you're lactose intolerant, you're going to have a rough time. Bring lactase pills. They didn't eat a lot of vegetables or grain, though they would obtain those through trade or tribute from agricultural peoples. If you're traveling with the Mongols, you'll be eating what they eat. If you're in a city or town, you'll have more options, markets, cookshops, street vendors, that kind of thing. But it depends heavily on the local culture. In China you'd have access to rice and noodles and vegetables. In the Middle East, bread and dates and various prepared foods. In Central Asia, lots of meat and dairy and some grain. Now let's talk about the language barrier, because this is complicated. The Mongols spoke Mongolian, obviously. If you're going to be interacting with Mongols directly, you need to learn Mongolian. Modern Mongolian is different from medieval Mongolian, but there are resources for learning Middle Mongolian if you dig around in academic sources. It's not an easy language if you're coming from an Indo-European language background, but it's doable. However, the Mongol Empire was multilingual. The Mongols conquered so many different peoples that they had to be able to communicate with all of them. They used interpreters extensively, and they adopted various administrative languages. In China, Chinese was used for administration. In the Middle East, Persian became a major administrative language under the Mongols. Arabic was also widely used. In Russia, various Slavic languages. So depending on where you are, you might be able to get by with Persian or Chinese or Arabic, especially if you're presenting yourself as a merchant or traveler from a distant region. There was also a multilingual environment in the major cities and along trade routes. Traders and merchants would often know multiple languages or at least enough to conduct business. So if you learn some basic commercial vocabulary in several languages, you can probably get by. Now, here's the thing about the Mongols that's actually pretty interesting. They were remarkably tolerant of different cultures and religions. I know that sounds weird given the whole massacring cities thing, but the Mongols didn't care what religion you practiced or what culture you came from, as long as you submitted to their authority and paid tribute. They employed Chinese bureaucrats, Persian administrators, Christian priests, Muslim scholars, Buddhist monks. They used whoever was useful. So being a foreigner in the Mongol Empire wasn't necessarily a disadvantage. In fact, foreigners sometimes had opportunities that locals didn't, because the Mongols liked to use outsiders as administrators since they didn't have local loyalties. Okay, so let's talk about your backstory, because this is crucial. You need to have a plausible reason for being there. You can't just show up and say you're from nowhere. People need to know who you are. Your best option is probably to present yourself as a merchant. The Mongol conquests disrupted trade in the short term, but they also created opportunities for merchants who were willing to take risks. Merchants from all over Eurasia traveled through Mongol-controlled territories. If you say you're a merchant from a distant land, people will believe you. The Mongols actually protected merchants once they established control, because they understood that trade made them money. What should you say you're trading in? Pick something that's valuable but not so valuable that you'd be a major target for robbery. Textiles are good. Furs are good. Semi-precious stones maybe. Don't say you're trading in gold or large amounts of silver or anything like that. And you don't actually need to have the goods with you. you can say you're scouting out routes, or you're meeting with partners, or your caravan is following behind, or whatever. Another option is to present yourself as a craftsman. The Mongols valued craftsmen highly. When they conquered cities, they would often spare the craftsmen and relocate them to other parts of the empire. If you were a skilled metalworker, or an engineer, or a craftsman of some kind, that could be valuable. But then you'd need to actually demonstrate those skills if asked, so that's risky unless you actually have those skills. You could also present yourself as a religious figure. The Mongols were generally tolerant of religions, and religious figures could travel relatively freely. Christian monks traveled through Mongol territories. Muslim scholars did too. Buddhist monks. If you're knowledgeable about a particular religion and can convincingly present yourself as a monk or scholar, that's an option. But you'd need to really know your stuff. What you probably don't want to do is present yourself as a soldier or a military person unless you're actually joining the Mongol army, because then people will ask questions about who you fight for and why you're traveling alone and what happened to your unit. Now, here's something really important. Your backstory needs to account for your appearance. If you look European and you're traveling in China, you need a story for why you're there. If you look East Asian and you're in the Middle East, same thing. But actually, this is less of a problem than you might think, because the Mongol conquests brought people from all over Eurasia into contact with each other. There were European merchants in China. There were Chinese craftsmen in Persia. There were Central Asian traders everywhere. So being from far away is actually pretty normal during this period. Let's talk about social structure, because it works differently than you might expect. Mongol society was organized around kinship and tribal affiliations, and then later around the structure of the empire. At the top you had the Khan and his family, the Golden Family, descendants of Genghis Khan. Below that you had the various Mongol nobles and clan leaders. Then you had commoners, Mongol herders and warriors. Below that you had conquered peoples, though their status varied depending on how they were incorporated into the empire. The thing is, the Mongols weren't as obsessed with fixed social hierarchy as some other cultures. There was more mobility. A talented person could rise in Mongol service regardless of their background. The Mongols promoted based on ability, at least in theory. So you didn't have to perform elaborate social deference rituals constantly. You should still be respectful to people of higher status, obviously, but it's not as rigid as some other systems. However, you do need to understand Mongol customs around hospitality and honor. The Mongols took hospitality very seriously. If someone invited you into their GER, you were under their protection. You don't refuse offered food or drink, that's insulting. If you're offered Irag, you drink it, even if it tastes weird to you. And it will taste weird. It's alcoholic fermented mare's milk. It's an acquired taste. You don't step on the threshold of a GER when you enter, step over it. You don't point your feet at the hearth. Learn these customs before you go, because violating them can be offensive. Now let's talk about something that's probably on your mind if you're not of Mongol ethnicity. What if you don't look Mongol? What if you're European, or African, or whatever? Here's the thing, the Mongol Empire was incredibly diverse. The Mongols themselves were a minority in their own empire. They ruled over Chinese, Persians, Turks, Russians, Arabs, you name it. And all those people were moving around the empire. So being a foreigner is not weird. People won't freak out because you look different. Now, if you're European, that's actually kind of interesting. There were Europeans in Mongol territories during this period. Missionaries, merchants, envoys. There were several documented cases of Europeans traveling to meet with Mongol Khans. So Europeans showing up in the Mongol Empire was unusual but not unheard of. If you're presenting as a European merchant or a Christian monk, that's believable. If you're African, that's going to depend on where you are. In the Middle Eastern parts of the Mongol Empire, African people wouldn't be that unusual because there was trade with East Africa and there were African slaves in the Middle East. In Central Asia or China, it would be more unusual, but not impossible. There were African people who traveled that far. You'd just attract more attention. If you're East Asian and you're traveling in the western parts of the empire, people might assume you're Chinese or Khitan or some other group from the East. That works fine. Just say you're a merchant from China or whatever. The key thing is, racism as we understand it today didn't really exist in the Mongol Empire. The Mongols didn't care about your ethnicity in the modern sense. They cared about whether you submitted to their rule, whether you were useful to them, and whether you followed their laws. That's it. So don't worry too much about looking different. Just have a good backstory. Now, religion. This is important. The Mongols were shamanistic, but they were remarkably tolerant of other religions. Genghis Khan himself said something along the lines of all religions are like the fingers of one hand, different but part of the same thing. The Mongols had Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, everyone in their empire, and they let them all practice freely as long as they didn't cause trouble. So if you're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, whatever, just present as that and you'll be fine. Don't proselytize aggressively, and don't claim that your religion is the only true religion and everyone else is wrong, because the Mongols didn't like that kind of sectarianism. But practicing your religion quietly? No problem. If you're atheist or non-religious, just don't bring it up. If someone asks, just say you respect all religions or something vague like that. The Mongols might find atheism weird, but they probably won't care that much as long as you're not causing problems. Let's talk about women travelers, because this is actually really interesting. Mongol women had more freedom and authority than women in many other contemporary societies. Mongol women could own property, they had legal rights, they could participate in business, and they sometimes even held political power. Several Mongol cartoons, wives of Khans, wielded significant influence. So if you're a woman visiting the Mongol Empire, you might actually have more freedom than you would in some other historical periods. However, that's specifically Mongol women. If you're traveling through territories the Mongols conquered, local customs still apply. In China or Persia, women had fewer rights and freedoms. So it depends where you are and which culture you're presenting as being from. If you're a woman presenting as a Mongol or as someone from the steppes, you can be relatively independent. If you're presenting as being from a sedentary agricultural society, you'd probably want to travel with male companions to avoid questions about why you're traveling alone. Now let's talk about what you should wear. This is important because you need to fit in. If you're presenting as a Mongol, you need to dress like a Mongol. That means a deal, a long robe tied with a sash, boots, a hat. Mongols wore different colored sashes to indicate status sometimes, so research that. If you're presenting as being from a conquered people, dress according to that culture. Chinese robes if you're in China, Persian clothing if you're in Persia, and so on. Don't show up in modern clothing. People won't know what to make of it. They won't necessarily think you're a witch or whatever, but they won't know how to place you socially, and that causes problems. Just wear period-appropriate clothing. Okay, so here's something I need to address, the violence. I've mentioned this, but I want to be really clear about it. The Mongol conquests were incredibly brutal by any standard. Cities were destroyed. Populations were massacred. The numbers are staggering. Some estimates say the Mongol conquests killed tens of millions of people. Now, some of that was indirect. The destruction of infrastructure led to famines and epidemics, but a lot of it was direct violence. If you're squeamish about violence, don't go. Don't witness a siege. Don't be anywhere near a battle. Because warfare during this period was horrific, and the Mongols were particularly ruthless. But here's the thing, if you stay away from active war zones, and you're in areas the Mongols have already conquered and established control over, it's actually relatively safe. The Mongols established law and order in their territories. They protected trade routes. They punished bandits. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, was a real thing, but it came after the conquests, once the Mongols had consolidated power. So my advice, if you want to visit the Mongol Empire, visit after they've established control in a region, not during the actual conquest. Visit Karakoram, the capital. Visit the Silk Road cities under Mongol rule. Visit China during the Yuan dynasty after Kublai Khan has established his rule. That's much safer than visiting during the active military campaigns. But if you're determined to witness the conquests themselves, stay far away from cities under siege, travel with a group, and be ready to leave at a moment's notice if things get dangerous. Now, arrival and departure. As always, you don't want people to see you arrive or leave. Arrive somewhere remote. The Central Asian steppes have a lot of open space, and at night it would be very dark. No light pollution whatsoever. Arrive at night, away from settlements. In the morning, travel to the nearest town or city and present yourself as a traveler. When you're ready to leave, do the same thing in reverse. Leave the town, go somewhere remote, and depart from there. Don't let anyone see your time machine or however you're traveling. That would cause questions you can't answer. Now, let me address something. What if you're tempted to change history? What if you want to warn people about the Mongols, or give them modern technology to defend themselves, or whatever? Don't. Just don't. First of all, there's the whole temporal paradox thing. I'm not going to get into the physics of time travel. But more importantly, even if you could change history, you don't know what the consequences would be. The Mongol conquests were devastating, but they also had long-term effects on world history. They connected Eurasia in new ways. They facilitated the exchange of technology and ideas. If you prevent the Mongol conquests, you might prevent a lot of suffering, but you might also prevent all sorts of developments that led to the modern world. So just observe. Don't interfere. Take notes, take pictures if you can do so without being noticed, but don't try to change anything. Okay, so let me talk about technology and anachronisms. Don't flash around modern technology. Don't show people your smartphone or your camera or whatever. Keep that stuff hidden. If someone does see something, you can try to pass it off as an exotic curiosity from a faraway land, but it's risky. Don't try to explain modern science or technology to people. Don't talk about germ theory or electricity or whatever. They won't understand, and they'll think you're crazy. Just keep your knowledge to yourself. One more thing, documentation. You're probably going to want to record your experiences, take notes, whatever. Do that, but be careful. If someone sees you writing in English, or whatever modern language you use, they won't be able to read it, which is actually good. But they might be curious about what you're writing. You could say it's a merchant's account book, or a religious text, or whatever. Just have a cover story ready. I think that covers the main points. Finally, I can't stress this enough, research the specific time and place you're going to. The Mongol Empire was huge, and it changed over time. What was true in 1220 in Central Asia wasn't necessarily true in 1260 in China. So do your homework. Stay safe out there, time travelers. Every traveler leaves something behind. If this log helped you prepare for your own journey, leave a like and subscribe so you're ready for the next log.